think I didn't do anything wrong, just spent one night where I felt alive again. But the next morning, the papers came. I thought he'd shout, cry, beg. But instead, he ended everything quietly, like he'd been waiting for me to make that final mistake. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started on a Thursday, which already felt wrong for an anniversary. Thursdays were for grocery runs, half-done chores, and work leftovers, not for romance. But Thomas didn't care about things like that. He said any day could be special if you planned for it. I said nothing, smiled, and promised I'd be home by 7. I never intended to keep that promise. At the hospital, Julian was waiting by the staff exit, still in his scrubs, holding 2 takeout coffees. He grinned when he saw me. "You look exhausted," he said. I told him it had been one of those endless days, which was half true. He offered to grab a drink before heading home, and I didn't even pretend to hesitate. One drink, I told myself. I deserved one night where I didn't feel like a background character in my own life. We went to that small wine bar near the river, the one with the dim lights and too loud jazz that made everyone feel more interesting than they really were. I told Julian about the chaos at work, how the new intern kept mixing up patient files, and how Thomas wouldn't stop asking what time I'd be home. He laughed and said, "He sounds protective." I rolled my eyes. "He's controlling," I said. "Always needs everything scheduled, even our fun." Julian leaned closer and said, "Then maybe you need some unscheduled fun." It wasn't supposed to be anything serious. It was just a glass of wine, a little flirting, the rush of being seen. He looked at me like I was exciting again, not just useful. I told him it was my wedding anniversary, said it like a joke, and he laughed too. He said, "You're celebrating with the wrong man." I told him, maybe the right one showed up late. I thought it sounded clever at the time. By the time I checked my phone, it was 10:47. 3 missed calls from Thomas, one message that said, "Dinner's ready. Hope you're okay." My stomach tightened, but I told Julian I had to go. He offered to walk me to my car, his hand brushing my arm as we left. I let it linger. For once, I didn't feel invisible. When I got home, the house was quiet. There was a faint smell of burnt candles and something cold on the stove. Thomas was on the couch, still in his work shirt, his glasses folded on the table beside a half-empty wine glass. He didn't look up when I walked in. I said I'd been called in for an emergency. He nodded once, still looking at the floor. I tried to sound casual. "Did you eat?" he said, eventually. Then he asked, without any anger, "Who's Julian?" For a second, I thought he was bluffing. Then I saw it. My phone on the table, the screen still glowing with a message I must have sent by mistake. "Still can't believe how alive I felt tonight. You have no idea what that meant. It wasn't meant for him, obviously." I felt heat rush up my neck, but I didn't show it. I said, "That's a coworker. We were covering a case together. You're overreacting." He didn't argue. He just stood up, blew out the last candle and said, "Happy anniversary, Irina." His voice was calm, which made it worse. I told him he was making a big deal out of nothing, but he just walked upstairs. I followed, trying to fix it before it got out of hand. "You don't understand," I said. "It was just work." He said quietly, "Then why did you lie about it?" I didn't answer. The next morning, he left early, before the kids woke up. I found the dinner he'd made still sitting in the fridge, chicken masala, my favorite, the one dish he always made when he wanted to make me laugh. I threw it out without thinking. I told myself he was being childish, punishing me for being busy. At work, I told Julian everything. I said Thomas was furious, said he'd ruined the whole evening. Julian just smiled and said, "Maybe he'll get over it." By afternoon, Thomas texted, "We'll talk later." That phrase made me angry. It sounded like something a parent would say to a child. I replied, "There's nothing to talk about." He didn't respond. When I got home that night, the kids were watching a movie, and he was helping them with homework like nothing had happened. I tried to act normal, kissed the top of Owen's head, asked Leah about her spelling test. Thomas didn't look at me once. After they went to bed, I sat across from him in the living room. "You're really going to stay angry over a dinner?" I asked. He said, "It's not about the dinner." I asked, "Then what?" He said, "It's about the lie." I told him everyone lies sometimes, especially when they're trying to avoid drama. He said, "So I'm the drama." I laughed a little, trying to soften it, but he didn't smile. "I'm tired, Irina," he said. "Tired of being your excuse." That line stayed with me. I wanted to tell him he was being cruel, but deep down I knew he was right. Still, I couldn't admit it. I said, "You act like I'm the only one who ever makes mistakes. Maybe if you paid attention once in a while, I wouldn't need to find attention somewhere else." He looked at me for a long time, then said, "You found it." And then he went upstairs again, leaving me alone with my words echoing back like something poisonous. That weekend, I tried to fix things by pretending nothing was wrong. I planned a family outing, cooked breakfast, smiled too much. Thomas stayed polite but distant. When my mother called, I told her he was sulking again. She laughed and said, "Men hate being shown up. He'll get over it." That made me feel better for a while. I even texted Julian that night, told him Thomas was being dramatic. He sent back a single line. "He's not wrong, you know." I didn't reply. On Sunday night, Thomas tucked the kids into bed and came downstairs holding his phone. He said he wanted to show me something. It was the photo he'd taken of the dining table from Thursday. Candles lit, plates set, a small wrapped gift beside my empty chair. He said, "You didn't even ask what this was." I said, "I didn't need to." He said, "It was a bracelet. For you. You said yours broke last year." I didn't know what to say. The silence between us stretched until he finally said, "You should sleep in tomorrow. I'll take the kids to school." His voice was calm again, too calm. I nodded, pretending to be grateful, not realizing that he'd already made up his mind. The next morning, when I came downstairs, the bracelet box was gone. So was he. Only the candle stubs and the faint smell of wine remained, proof of a celebration I had managed to ruin completely, and a man who, for the first time, looked ready to let go. For the next few days, I convinced myself it was fine. I told everyone at work that Thomas and I were just having a little misunderstanding. I even laughed when Julian asked if things were okay at home. I said, "He's sensitive. He hates when I make him look bad." Julian smirked and said, "Some men can't handle confident women." I liked that answer. It gave me something to repeat later when my mother asked what was going on. Thomas didn't bring anything up again. He just moved through the house like a quiet ghost, polite but unreachable. He'd make coffee, pack lunches, check the mail, and barely look at me. I tried to bait him into an argument once, asking why he was acting like a victim over one night. He said nothing. That silence infuriated me more than any shouting could. I wanted him to yell, to show that he still cared, but instead, he just kept disappearing behind that calm wall. I told myself he was punishing me, and that made him the problem. The kids noticed it too. Leah asked one morning, "Why does Dad sleep on the couch?" I told her he had a sore back. Owen looked at me skeptically, then asked if we were fighting. I said, "No, honey, grown-ups just need space sometimes." They didn't look convinced. When I got to work that day, Julian was waiting near the elevators. He said he'd heard Thomas came to the hospital on the night of the anniversary. I froze. "Who told you that?" He shrugged. "Someone saw him in the lobby. Said he looked like he was waiting for you." My stomach dropped. I pictured Thomas sitting there under those fluorescent lights, holding flowers or something, while I was laughing over wine with Julian. I told myself it was fine, that he'd had no reason to spy on me, but the image stayed in my head all day. That night, when Thomas came home, I decided to take control of the story, before he could use it against me. I said I heard he'd been lurking at the hospital. He blinked, clearly caught off guard, and said he was worried because I hadn't answered my phone. I said, "So now you're following me?" He frowned. "You lied about working late, Irina." I rolled my eyes. "Because I knew you'd react like this. You always need to make everything dramatic." He looked at me for a moment, then said, "I'm not the one who made it dramatic." That calm voice again, steady, unbearable. I said, "You're making me feel like a criminal. I had a drink with a coworker, that's all." He said, "Then why lie about it?" I didn't answer that one either. When he went upstairs, I texted Julian, complaining about how controlling Thomas was being. Julian replied, "Maybe he's scared of losing you." I smiled at that, though it didn't feel good. It felt like a lie dressed up as comfort. Over the next week, I tried everything. Sweetness, sarcasm, guilt. I told Thomas we should just move on, that couples go through rough patches. He said, "We're not a couple. We're two people pretending not to notice the cracks." That line hurt, but I wouldn't show it. I said, "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Acting like the victim." He said, "No, I'm just done arguing with someone who never listens." I told my mother about it the next day. I expected her to tell me he was being ridiculous. Instead, she sighed and said, "You always push, Irina. You push until people break." I snapped, "He's not broken, he's sulking." She didn't answer that either. By Friday, I was exhausted from pretending everything was fine. At work, I overheard someone mention Thomas had been meeting with a consultant. I brushed it off, assuming it was something about his clients. But later that evening, when I asked him what his plans were for the weekend, he said, "I have some meetings." I asked, "What kind of meetings?" He said, "The kind you'll hear about soon." Then he took his jacket and left. I waited up until midnight, half angry, half nervous. When he came home, he smelled like cold air and paper. He looked almost peaceful. I asked if he wanted to talk. He said, "Not tonight." I pressed again. "You can't keep shutting me out." He said, "You shut me out the moment you stopped being honest." Then he walked past me, and for the first time, I realized how easy it was for him to leave a room without looking back. The next morning, I noticed the framed photo from our wedding was gone from the hallway wall. I searched the drawers, the bookshelf, nothing. I asked the kids if they'd seen it. Leah said Dad took it to his office. He said he needed to remember something. I didn't know what that meant, but it didn't sound like forgiveness. That evening, I went through his desk. I found a receipt from a downtown law office tucked between some bills. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was work-related, that I was imagining things. But when he came home later, I asked directly, "Why were you at a lawyer's office?" He looked at me like he'd already expected the question. "Because I needed advice." I said, "About what?" He said, "About honesty." Then he went upstairs, again leaving me standing there with no answers. I called Julian after that. I needed someone to agree with me. I told him Thomas was trying to intimidate me, maybe even setting me up. Julian said, "You should probably lay low for a while." I laughed bitterly. "What does that mean?" He said, "It means I don't want to get involved." Then he hung up. I sat on the couch staring at the dark window, my reflection faint against the glass. For the first time, I noticed how tired I looked. Not guilty, not scared, just tired. I thought about going upstairs, saying something kind, something real, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just sat there, replaying every time I'd twisted a story to make myself the hero. Every time I'd turned his silence into evidence of cruelty. Later that night, I heard him on the phone in the guest room. His voice was quiet but firm. "Yes, I have everything documented. Texts, calls, even the bank statements. I just want this handled cleanly." I didn't need to hear the rest. The meaning was clear enough. I went back downstairs, poured myself a drink, and tried to pretend it didn't matter. I told myself he wouldn't actually go through with it, that he loved me too much to make it public. But deep down, something in me knew the truth. He wasn't planning a fight anymore. He was planning an ending, and I had handed him every reason to make it easy. The tension finally boiled over the night of the hospital awards dinner. I wasn't even supposed to go. Thomas had asked if I wanted to spend the evening at home with the kids instead. But I needed to be seen. I needed people to look at me and think she's thriving, not she's unraveling. So I dressed up, did my makeup twice, and went anyway. Julian was there, of course. He'd texted earlier that he missed talking to me. I told him to save me a seat. The event was at a wine bar downtown, the same one where everything had started. The lights were low, the crowd loud. I told myself it was a new chapter, that I'd stopped caring what Thomas thought. When people asked where he was, I laughed and said he was too busy balancing spreadsheets to celebrate. They laughed too. It felt good to be the funny one again, the bold one. Julian poured me another glass of wine and said I deserved to enjoy myself. I told him I'd stopped apologizing for that. Around 9, the laughter grew louder, and so did my voice. I joked about marriage being just good PR with tax benefits, and everyone chuckled. I felt untouchable. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, Thomas, standing at the entrance, wearing that same calm, unreadable expression. My stomach dropped, but I didn't show it. I smiled wider. I waved him over like he was an uninvited guest at my own party. When he reached the table, Julian went quiet. The others looked uneasy, unsure whether to greet him or look away. I said lightly, "Didn't expect you here, Thomas. Finally decided to see where I spend my time." He said, "I came to drop something off." His voice was calm, too calm. I asked what it was, pretending to be amused. He held out a small envelope and said, "You left this in my car last week." It was a parking ticket from the night of the anniversary, the one from the wine bar. I felt the blood rush to my face, but I laughed anyway. "You drove all the way here for that?" I said. He looked around at my co-workers, then at Julian, then back at me. "No," he said. "I wanted to see what I've been competing with." The table went silent. I said, "Don't start this here." He said, "I won't." Then he turned and left. The silence afterward was unbearable. I grabbed my bag and followed him outside, heels clicking too loud on the pavement. "What was that supposed to be?" I hissed. He said, "You made me the fool, Irina. I just wanted to see what it looked like." I told him he was overreacting again, that he was obsessed with appearances. "You could have talked to me like an adult," I said. He nodded. "You're right. I should have talked to you before I realized you'd stopped listening." Then he walked away, leaving me standing under the streetlight, holding the empty envelope. I didn't go back inside. I drove home instead, my heart pounding, half from anger, half from shame. When I got there, the house was dark, except for the kitchen light. The bracelet he'd bought for our anniversary was sitting on the counter, the lid of its box open. I slammed the box shut, tossed it in a drawer, and went upstairs. I told myself he wanted me to feel guilty. I refused to give him that satisfaction. The next morning, my phone buzzed non-stop. Messages from co-workers, half gossip, half pity. Someone had recorded part of the scene at the bar. I watched the clip once, just once. You could see me smiling too wide, Thomas's calm face, the moment he handed me the envelope. The caption someone added said, "When your husband crashes your work party." The comments were worse. I shut my phone off. By noon, Julian sent a message. "We need to talk." I assumed he wanted to apologize for not saying anything the night before. Instead, he said, "I can't keep doing this." I asked what he meant. He said, "Everyone knows. This isn't harmless anymore." I told him he was being dramatic, that nobody cared. He said, "Your husband does, and he's not stupid." That stung. "So you're running away now?" I asked. He said, "I never signed up to be the reason someone gets destroyed." Then he ended the call. When Thomas came home that night, I was waiting. I wanted to fight. "Congratulations," I said. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." He just looked tired. "You humiliated yourself," he said. "I just stopped protecting you from it." I said, "You think you're so righteous. You're just trying to make yourself the victim." He didn't respond. He went straight upstairs, shutting the door quietly. That quiet always made me feel small. I tried calling my mother later, hoping she'd take my side, but she already knew. Someone from her church group had seen the video. "Irina," she said, "what were you thinking?" I told her Thomas had ambushed me, that he'd planned it to make me look bad. She said, "No one made you laugh like that in another man's face." Then she hung up. Over the weekend, I tried to act like nothing happened. I took the kids to the park, posted pictures online, forced smiles. People liked the post, commented about how strong I looked. But when I came home, Thomas's things were half gone. His closet half empty, his drawer cleaned out. There was a note on the dresser. "Don't worry, I've taken what's mine. I won't make a scene." I stared at the note until my hand started shaking. I texted him. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. Then I texted again. "You can't just disappear." Still nothing. That silence hit harder than any argument we'd ever had. Monday morning, I showed up at work pretending to be fine. Julian avoided me completely. My supervisor asked if I needed time off. I said no, I wasn't giving anyone that satisfaction. But when I got home that evening, the house was colder, emptier. On the counter sat another envelope, thicker, heavier this time, with a note in his handwriting. "You'll understand soon enough." I told myself it was a bluff, another one of his quiet games. He wouldn't dare make it official. He needed me too much. That's what I kept repeating as I poured a glass of wine and scrolled through old messages from Julian, telling myself I still had control. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Thomas had stopped reacting, and that, somehow, was the scariest part of all. I told myself I could fix everything if I just acted like I wasn't afraid. I'd been through worse with Thomas, or at least I thought I had. He'd always cooled down before. This time, though, the quiet didn't feel like a pause. It felt like distance. He moved into an apartment near his office, saying he needed space to think. I told him that was ridiculous, that couples don't solve things by running away. He said, "We're not solving anything, Irina. We're ending things slowly." I refused to believe him. I told everyone he was being dramatic. To my co-workers, I said he'd had some kind of midlife crisis. To my mother, I said he was punishing me for being honest. She didn't answer that, which annoyed me more than if she'd scolded me. Even the kids stopped asking when he was coming home. They just assumed he'd show up eventually, because dads always do. At work, people avoided eye contact. I could feel them watching, whispering. Julian wouldn't even look at me anymore. I cornered him in the supply room one afternoon and said, "You can't just pretend we never meant anything." He looked uncomfortable. "You should focus on fixing your marriage," he said. I laughed like it was a joke, but he didn't. "It's not fixable," I said. "He's already checked out." Julian said quietly, "Then maybe you should let him." That line made me furious. I told him he was a coward, that he'd led me on. He didn't argue. He just left the room, and that was the last real conversation we ever had. That night, I sat in the kitchen scrolling through my phone, looking for anyone who might still be on my side. My friend Clara sent me a single message. Maybe just stay quiet for a while. People talk less when you stop feeding them stories. I almost threw the phone across the room. I didn't want to stay quiet. I wanted control back. So I decided to reclaim it the only way I knew how, by making Thomas look like the problem. I started telling people he'd been emotionally manipulative for years, that he was controlling, cold, obsessive about appearances. I posted vague things online about healing from silent cruelty, and people sent supportive comments, little hearts and messages about self-worth. It felt good for a day. But then someone sent me a screenshot of a reply under one of my posts. It was from one of Thomas's colleagues. It said, "He's one of the kindest men I've met. Maybe look in the mirror." That night I called him. "You're turning people against me," I said. He sounded tired. "I haven't said a word, Irina. You're doing fine on your own." I told him he was lying, that his friends were attacking me. He said, "No, they're defending the truth." That calmness again, that tone that made everything I said sound childish. I hung up. The next week, my mother called. "He came by," she said. My heart dropped. "Why?" I asked. "To see the kids," she said, "and to drop off some documents." I felt the air leave my lungs. "What documents?" She paused. "Something about accounts. He said you'd know." I didn't, but later that night, an email arrived from his lawyer, Susan Chow. The subject line said, "Preliminary Disclosure Statement." I didn't understand most of it, just words about assets, joint accounts, and property division. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People talk to lawyers all the time, but when I read the line that said, "Proposed separation terms pending signature," my throat went dry. I drove to his apartment the next evening without warning him. When he opened the door, he looked startled but not surprised. "Irina," he said calmly, "you shouldn't be here." I said, "You can't just file papers behind my back." He said, "You knew this was coming." I said, "You're trying to destroy me." He said, "No, I'm trying to protect myself." I tried to sound rational. "You're making a mistake," I told him. "This is just a phase. We can fix it if we talk." He said, "I've been talking for years. You just never heard me." That made me angry again. "You always twist things to make me look like the villain," I said. He nodded slightly. "You don't need help looking that way anymore." I should have left, but I couldn't. I followed him as he moved around the apartment, talking faster, louder, trying to pull him back into an argument, anything that would make him feel something. "You're throwing away everything we built," I said. He turned and looked at me with those tired eyes. "You threw it first," he said. The next morning, he sent a text. "Don't come to the apartment again. All communication should go through legal channels." I stared at it for a long time. Legal channels. It sounded unreal, like we were strangers in some dispute over a parking ticket, not a marriage. I tried calling Vivian, desperate for someone to tell me I wasn't losing everything. She listened quietly, then said, "I warned you, Irina. He's not angry anymore. That's what scares me." I said, "You're taking his side." She said, "No, I'm just done pretending you didn't bring this on yourself." Then she hung up. I spent the next few days in a fog. Work was unbearable. Every time I passed Julian, I felt the weight of his pity. The kids were staying at my mother's for a few nights, and the house felt too big without them. I kept expecting Thomas to text, to ask if I was eating or sleeping, to offer something familiar. But the silence stretched. The only message I got was from his lawyer. "Please review the attached documents and prepare for mediation." I didn't open them right away. Instead, I poured a drink and went to the window, staring out at the driveway. That's when I saw him, Thomas, standing near his car with a woman in a grey suit. They were shaking hands, exchanging papers. My heart started pounding. I opened the door and called out, "Who is that?" He didn't answer. The woman smiled politely, then got into her car. Thomas looked at me for a moment and said, "Someone helping me move forward." Then he left. I stood there barefoot on the porch, clutching the doorframe, watching the taillights disappear. The night air felt sharp, too clean. For the first time, I realized he wasn't bluffing anymore. This wasn't about punishment or pride. He was already halfway gone, and the rest of him was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. The letter from his lawyer arrived 2 days later, thick and official, sealed in a cream envelope that looked too elegant for something so cruel. I held it in my hands for a long time before opening it. Inside were pages, so many pages, covered in neat, careful language that stripped our life down to numbers and clauses. Proposed separation agreement, asset division, custody arrangement. Every line sounded polite, professional, and devastating. It was like he'd managed to erase me with good manners. I called him immediately. He didn't answer, so I left a message, half angry, half desperate. "You don't have to do this, Thomas. We can still talk like adults." No response. I tried again later that evening. "If you're trying to hurt me, congratulations. You've done it." Still silence. I forwarded the email to my mother, asking what I should do. She wrote back one sentence. "You should have thought before he stopped caring." That hurt more than the papers. By the end of the week, I was sitting in a conference room across from Thomas and his lawyer, Susan Chow. The room smelled like new paper and air conditioning. Thomas looked calm, almost polite, as if we were there to discuss someone else's life. I tried to look composed, though my hands wouldn't stay still. Susan smiled professionally and said, "Mrs. Vale, thank you for coming." I said, "I'm only here because I want to understand what he's doing." Susan nodded. "Of course, this is about clarity." She opened a folder, sliding a set of documents toward me. "Mr. Vale has prepared full disclosures," she said, "financial records, joint account summaries, and relevant correspondence." I looked down and felt my stomach twist. There were screenshots of messages between Julian and me, short, harmless words that somehow looked damning when printed on clean white paper. "You make me feel alive." He doesn't notice me anymore. One drink turned into 3. I looked up at Thomas. "You went through my phone?" He said, "Shared cloud storage. You never changed the password." I wanted to scream, but I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. "You've been spying on me," I said. He said, "I've been protecting myself." Susan cleared her throat gently. "These messages, along with workplace records, establish a pattern of emotional infidelity that your husband finds irreconcilable." "Emotional infidelity," I repeated, laughing sharply. "Is that even a real thing?" Susan met my eyes calmly. "In this context, it demonstrates misconduct. It's relevant to the division of assets." I said, "You're punishing me for feelings." Thomas said, "No, for choices." I tried to shift the focus. "You're ruining the children's stability. They need both parents, not lawyers." Susan nodded. "He agrees. That's why he's requesting joint custody, alternate weekends, shared holidays, equitable arrangements." I blinked. "Equitable? You're acting like this is a business deal." Thomas said quietly, "You made it one." The calmness in his voice made me angrier than any shouting could. I leaned forward, whispering, "You're doing this because you want revenge." He shook his head. "I'm doing this because I can't live like this anymore." Susan interrupted, "Mrs. Vale, your husband's goal is closure, not conflict. If you cooperate, this can be resolved amicably." I laughed bitterly. "Amicably? You're handing me printed evidence of my own humiliation." He didn't respond. He just sat there, pen in hand, the picture of composure. I realized then that he'd planned this carefully. The day he stopped arguing was the day he started collecting proof. Susan explained the next steps: asset evaluations, property titles, timelines. Her tone was steady, practiced. My mind barely registered the words. I could only hear one thing, that he'd already made peace with losing me. When the meeting ended, he stood and buttoned his jacket. I said, "So this is it?" He nodded. "Almost." Then he handed me another folder. "This one's for you." Inside were copies of emails I'd sent to friends, screenshots from social media posts I thought were harmless, jokes about marriage, about cold husbands, about finding joy outside the cage. Each post was time-stamped, each paired with a comment thread full of laughing emojis. "You kept these," I whispered. He said, "They were public. Everyone kept them." I couldn't look at him anymore. I gathered the papers, my hands shaking. "You're so calm," I said. "Do you even feel anything?" He looked at me, and for a brief second I saw something. Sadness, maybe. I felt everything, he said. That's why I'm done now. I left the office without saying goodbye. When I got outside, the air felt heavy, thick with the smell of rain. My phone buzzed. It was Julian. I heard what's happening. I'm sorry. I wanted to reply, but I couldn't think of a single word that wouldn't sound pathetic. That night, I drank wine straight from the bottle and read through the papers again. Every word was a reminder that he'd been preparing for this long before I realized it. There were notes about financial accounts I didn't even know existed, joint purchases I'd forgotten about. He hadn't just walked away. He'd cleaned the slate, step by step, without ever raising his voice. The next morning, I showed up at my mother's place, hoping for sympathy. She opened the door, took one look at me, and said, "He gave you the papers, didn't he?" I nodded. She sighed, sat me down, and said, "He warned you, Irina. I told you silence was the sound of someone making a plan." I said, "You think this is fair?" She said, "I think he learned how to protect himself from you." I stayed there for hours, reading and rereading the agreement until the words blurred. Property transfer, custody rotation, debt settlements, it all sounded so clinical, so final. There was even a clause about online conduct, requiring me to delete any posts referencing him or our marriage. He'd thought of everything. That evening, Susan called to confirm receipt. Her tone was polite, efficient. "Mr. Vale will proceed once the documents are acknowledged," she said. "He's willing to sign within the week." I asked, "Does he even care how this looks?" She paused before answering. "He cares that it's legal." Then she wished me a good evening. When the call ended, I sat there staring at the ceiling, trying to remember when exactly he'd stopped being the man I could manipulate. Maybe he hadn't changed at all. Maybe he'd just learned to stop explaining himself. Before going to bed, I looked at the final page again. His signature already printed, dated the morning after our anniversary. He hadn't made a spur-of-the-moment decision. He'd planned this calmly, quietly, waiting for me to prove him right. And I had. The papers came back that Monday morning, delivered in a thick envelope stamped with the law firm's insignia. My name looked strange next to the word respondent, as if I were part of a story written by someone else. I carried the envelope into the kitchen and placed it on the table, beside a half-empty mug of cold coffee. For a long time, I just stared at it. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I told myself I wouldn't open it, not yet, but I already knew what was inside. I walked around the kitchen, touching the things he'd left behind, his coffee scoop, his chipped mug, the hook where he used to hang his keys. Everything felt smaller now. I poured another cup, sat down, and tore open the envelope. Inside were clean typed pages and a letter from Susan Chow. Finalized agreement, signed and filed. Effective immediately. It didn't say divorce in big letters, but it didn't have to. My first thought wasn't sadness, it was disbelief. He'd really done it. He hadn't called, hadn't argued, hadn't asked for one more chance to fix things. He'd just ended it like a business deal. Every promise, every memory, reduced to paper. My name, his name, and a judge's signature. No emotion, just ink. I called him anyway, though I knew he wouldn't answer. When his voicemail came on, I said, "You can't just disappear. We're still family." My voice cracked halfway through. I hung up before I could say more. An hour later, my mother showed up without knocking. She must have heard from him or the lawyer. She always found out before I did. She took one look at me and said, "It's over, isn't it?" I nodded. She sat down across from me, smoothing the tablecloth like she needed to keep her hands busy. "He was calm when he called," she said quietly. Said it was all finalized. No anger in his voice. I said, "How can he be calm? I ruined his life." She looked at me for a long time, then said, "No, Irina, you ruined your own." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. The words hung there, too heavy to fight. I asked if he'd said anything else. She nodded. "He said he's moving to a new place next month, somewhere quieter." My throat tightened. He's taking the kids. She shook her head. Shared custody, alternate weeks. He'll pick them up Friday. I tried to sound strong. He won't last a month without me. She didn't respond. When she left, the house felt emptier than before. I wandered from room to room, picking up little things. His tie clip, a framed photo of the four of us at the beach, the bracelet he'd bought for our last anniversary still sitting in the drawer. I held it for a long time, tracing the small silver links. It was supposed to be a symbol of us fixing things. Now it just felt like proof that I hadn't even tried. In the afternoon, a notification popped up on my phone. Case closed. Filed documentation confirmed. That was it. No ceremony, no confrontation, no moment to plead my side. Just closure, cold and final. I sat on the couch staring at the screen until my eyes blurred. I thought about Julian then, wondering if he'd heard. I opened our old messages but didn't type anything. What would I even say? It's official. I lost everything for nothing. I deleted the chat instead. By evening, the light outside turned orange, fading into that quiet, lonely kind of dusk. I poured myself another glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the street. Somewhere, a dog barked. Ours, probably, at Thomas's new place. The sound was faint but unmistakable. I imagined him sitting on a couch, calm as ever, the dog at his feet, maybe even smiling for the first time in months. I picked up the final decree again and read the last line. All parties have reached agreement and accepted terms without contest. Without contest. He didn't even have to fight me. He'd just waited for me to bury myself, and I did. I whispered to the empty room. He planned this. The words came out shaky, not angry, just tired. I thought saying them would make me feel powerful again, like I still had control. But it only made me feel small. The papers lay flat on the table, the ink already dry. My mother's words echoed softly in my head. He was calm when he called. That calmness wasn't indifference. It was freedom. He'd finally done what I never thought he could. He'd let me go. I folded the decree carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and set it beside the untouched coffee. The night outside deepened, the silence thick. For the first time, I didn't try to explain myself to anyone, not even to me. I just sat there, still and quiet, waiting for nothing at all. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.